This first story comes from an old, dilapidated asylum. The kind of place you drive past and see crumbling brick walls, with shattered windows and an eerie silence that screams something isn't right. This asylum had been abandoned for decades, and even though the authorities had locked it down, rumors about its sinister past still circulated among locals. One night, a group of 4 friends, all avid urban explorers, decided to visit the place. They had heard the stories, screams echoing through the halls, whispers in empty rooms, and strange shadowy figures seen moving behind broken glass. But they didn't believe in all that. They were just looking for a thrill. They entered through a broken gate, the cold night air biting at their skin. The silence was suffocating as they stepped into the asylum's decaying hallways. Flashlights flickered as they moved, the floors creaking under their weight. The smell of mildew and old would fill the air, the building long abandoned but not yet fully reclaimed by nature. As they made their way through the asylum's darkened corridors, one of them, Mark, pointed out a door at the end of the hall. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. The door's paint was peeling and the handle was tarnished. Curious, they all moved toward it, their footsteps echoing through the empty space. When they opened it, they were hit by an overwhelming sense of cold. It was as if the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Inside was a long, narrow room, filled with old hospital beds, some still covered with tattered sheets. But it wasn't the beds that caught their attention. It was the mirror on the far wall. It was huge, cracked but still standing. Mark stepped closer, his flashlight beam illuminating the dust-covered surface. But as he leaned in to get a closer look, something strange happened. His reflection wasn't right. His face was twisted in a grotesque way, and the other 3 appeared blurry, as though they weren't really there at all. Mark's blood ran cold. He backed away quickly, his heart pounding his chest, but before he could speak, the door slammed shut behind him. The group tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as they heard it, faint whispers. At first, they thought it was the wind, but then it got louder. It sounded like someone was breathing heavily right behind them. They spun around, but there was nothing there, just the emptiness of the asylum and their own terrified breaths. The door finally creaked open on its own, but when they tried to leave, they noticed something strange. The hallway they had come through was gone. The familiar route was now a twisted maze of identical rooms. Desperation set in, and they ran, terrified. As they made it to the exit, the sun was beginning to rise. They left the asylum that morning, shaken to their core, but when they looked back one last time, they saw a figure standing in the window, a woman with hollow eyes, staring right at them. They never spoke of what happened again. They couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had followed them out. This next story takes us to a place known as the Hilltop Mansion. It's a Victorian-style home on the edge of town, perched high on a hill with a view of everything below. The house has been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, and the paint peeling off the once beautiful wood siding. No one dared go near it, except for one curious soul, a man named Thomas. Thomas had heard the rumors. People said the mansion was cursed, that the last family to live there disappeared without a trace. Some even claimed to hear voices at night coming from the house, though no one had lived there for decades. One stormy night, Thomas couldn't resist. He drove up the mansion, parked his car at the end of the long, winding driveway, and began walking toward the house. The wind howled around him, and the air felt heavy, charged with something sinister. As he stepped onto the creaky porch, the door slowly creaked open. He hesitated for only a second, then stepped inside. The interior of the mansion was just as expected, dark, dusty, and decayed. Furniture was overturned, and cobwebs hung from the corners. But there was something more, a feeling that he was being watched. As he moved further inside, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, not his own. Thomas froze. He turned toward the staircase, where the footsteps were coming from. He called out, thinking someone else had broken in. But no answer came. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, pulling him deeper into the house. The deeper he ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The mansion was alive with whispers, the faintest hint of voices just beyond his hearing. Suddenly, he was not alone. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He whipped around, but no one was there. His heart raced as he stumbled backward, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the voices grew louder, echoing through the empty halls. He had to leave. Thomas ran for the front door, but when he reached it, he found it locked. He scrambled, desperate, trying to escape the unseen force closing in on him. His flashlight flickered and died. Then, in the pitch black, he heard it, a low, guttural growl from somewhere in a house. With every ounce of energy, he managed to break open a side window and crawl out into the storm. He ran down the hill, never looking back. But as he glanced up at the mansion, he saw something that froze him in place. At one of the upstairs windows, a figure stood, a woman, and she was smiling. The last story I'm going to share with you tonight takes us to a place that's all too familiar to travelers, a hotel. But this hotel is not like the others. The Old Hollow Inn, as it was called, had been around for nearly a century. Located on the edge of a small town, it was often overlooked, its faded sign barely visible in the dark. One winter night, a woman named Claire found herself in town, stranded after a car broke down. She was exhausted and decided to book a room at the Old Hollow Inn, seeing it as the only option. The lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old wood and something musty. The receptionist, a pale man with dark eyes, handed her a key to room 217 without a word. Claire made her way upstairs, her footsteps echoing down the long, narrow hallway. The moment she entered her room, she felt a chill. The heater wasn't working, and the bed felt like it had been slept in, even though no one was there. But the strangest thing was the mirror above the bed. It was cracked, with streaks of dust and grime, but there was something about it that drew her in. She couldn't explain why, but she felt compelled to stare at it. As the night grew colder, Claire started to hear noises, faint scratching sounds coming from the walls. She tried to ignore them, pulling the covers up to her chin. But then a voice, soft like a whisper, but clear as day. "Help me?" Claire sat up straight, her heart pounding. She turned toward the mirror. Her reflection wasn't hers. The face staring back at her was pale, with hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. She gasped and stumbled backward. The door slammed shut on its own, and the room plunged into darkness. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by faint crying. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the mirror. Suddenly, Claire saw something she'll never forget. The figure in the mirror, the twisted reflection, reached out a glass, its hand coming toward her. Panicked, she grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. But when she stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the hotel she remembered. The hallway stretched on forever, with no end in sight. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the lights flickered and dimmed. She turned to run back into her room, but when she looked at the mirror again, it was gone. The door was locked. She never spoke of it again, but every time she passes that part of town, she can't help but wonder, was she the only one who ever stayed there?